Welcome to our Wednesday night class of the Zera Shimshon here in Hollywood, Florida. Thank you everyone for joining us and all of those tuning in online and those that are going to see it later on. Tonight's class is going to be for Refuah Shlema, a speedy recovery for all Jewish people worldwide, but we want to have two specific in mind that were texted to me. The first is Yola Bat Mazal, who is a woman who normally comes to the class. Her sister, unfortunately, had a tragic car accident, and she's in the emergency room in New York, so may she have a speedy recovery. Again, that's Yola Bat Mazal. We also want to wish a successful procedure for also a very close friend of mine, Yaakov Azriel ben Gedalia Shlomo, that B'ezrat Hashem tomorrow he will have a very successful surgery. As long with all others who need a speedy recovery, Refuah Shlema, Amen v'Amen. This week's Torah portion, Ki Tisa. We are slowly creeping up on the end of the second book, the end of the book of Exodus. It's coming up, and we're going to discuss the main theme in this week's Torah portion. It's something which we discussed often, so I want to clarify something before we get into the depth of it, and that is the sin of the golden calf. And that was when the Jewish people, a very tragic episode, they turned away from God. They're brought out of Egypt. They are shown tremendous amount of miracles, the 10 plagues, the splitting of the sea, all of the great things. They're given the 10 commandments, and then they make a mistake. And their great mistake was a miscalculation. Right? In life, people do make miscalculations. So let's understand the miscalculation the Jewish people made when it came to the creation of this golden calf, which was another deity, a god that they started serving. Can you imagine, after all of the amazing miracles God performed, that they're going to go and they're going to look for another god that's gold? I mean, it's not anything spiritual. I think we mentioned last week that it was the influence of the mixed multitude, of the Erev Rav, the Egyptians that came along with the Jews. It was their idea to come up with a golden calf. But still, how did the Jews ever give in to and decide to worship this golden calf? So, it was on the 7th of Sivan, which was not too long, approximately 50 days after the Jewish people left Egypt. And that was the day that God summoned Moses up to the heavens for the top of the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights. The Jews, they counted, 7th of Sivan, that should be day 1. However, since it wasn't a complete day, and a complete day according to the Jewish calendar is night and day, just as the creation of the world was, Vayhi Erev, Vayhi Boker, Yom Echad, it's the night and the day which culminates a complete 24 hours according to the Torah. Since it wasn't whole, they were expecting him to come down on the 16th of Tammuz, which according to them was 40 days later. Midday of the 16th of the Tammuz comes along, and he wasn't there. The Jews started panicking, right? Jews love panicking, unfortunately. And they didn't know what to do. All of a sudden, the mixed multitude says, "Your God's gone, our God's on." And that's what they did. They said, "Everybody collect gold, we're making a new God." Hur jumped up and he said, "Absolutely not." And they murdered him for doing so, for standing up for what's right. Next, is they looked to Aaron, who was second in command, Moses' brother. They said, "Cast us a golden god." And he thought to himself, if I stand up to them and say not to do so, well, they'll murder me just as they murdered Hur. And if I just don't stand up to them, I just continue with their plan, maybe I'll try to procrastinate and buy us a little time till Moses comes. And then he said, what's the hardest thing to get a Jew to do?
Stop eating.
Close. Harder than money, harder than giving money. Guess what's harder to give, harder than stopping to eat, and harder to give money?
Getting money.
Getting your wife to take off her jewelry as a donation. Impossible. So Aaron was a smart man. Aaron was very, very smart. He said, you know what, guys? You want a new God? This is going to be a complicated God. This is going to be a greedy God, okay? This God is going to want you to go get all of the jewelry that you can possibly find, specifically gold. So he's thinking, perfect, I'm going to buy myself some time. My poor brother, Nachor, who was the husband of Miriam, he got murdered. He's trying to save life, and he's trying to procrastinate. Aaron never had the intention, the Zera Shimshon explains over and over, never had the intention to create a new God. He was just trying to buy some time. Unfortunately, the evil inclination was very, very powerful, very strong, and even allowed the husbands to convince their wives so quickly to take off their jewelry and give it towards the building of this golden calf. And there it was. They came back to Aaron's great surprise, to his demise at the same time, and they bring all this gold. He takes this gold, he doesn't know what to do with it. He throws it into like a bonfire, and all of a sudden, a golden calf comes out, and the Jews start worshiping it. The next morning, that was midday, they started freaking out and panicking midday on the 16th of Tammuz. The next day, the 17th, which was a complete 40 days, is when Moses comes down. And he's actually told by God, God tells him, quickly go down, because your nation has faulted. Your nation is serving another God. Moses comes down, the Torah says, and he hears them rioting. He hears them partying. He comes down, he sees what they're doing, he takes the tablets and he breaks the tablets. This is in a nutshell the episode, the unforgivable, unforgettable, tragic episode of the golden calf. So I just want to take a quick recap of this week's Torah portion from the beginning until we get to a certain place where I think we're all going to benefit tremendously from learning this very special concept, and it is going to be on the topic of Shabbat. I think we're going to analyze, according to the Zera Shimshon, new innovations, new novelties on the holiness and the sanctity of Shabbat that we have never paid attention to. So listen to the following. At first, this week's Torah portion starts off with a census. And the Torah tells us, God told Moses, we do not count Jews. Counting is limiting. So how are we going to know how many people there are? Well, we're going to collect a half a shekel from each person when it comes to times when we need to make a census and count the Jewish people. Those half shekels in the beginning will go towards the construction of the tabernacle, and subsequently after that it will be contributed towards the upkeep and maintaining the tabernacle. That is the first part of this week's Torah portion. Next part, the Torah tells us about this kiyor nechoshet, this copper wash basin that was in the courtyard of the tabernacle and then eventually in the temple, that all Kohanim, when they came to do their service in the temple, they would wash their hands and wash their feet. Remember, they would walk around barefoot. And the dimensions and specifications of this wash basin is mentioned. The next part is the anointment oil. The Torah tells us that every single one of the vessels and each and every one of the Kohanim, including Aaron and his children, were anointed with a special oil mixed of spices and oil. It was put on each and every vessel, as well as each and every single of the Kohanim. This practice was continued even after the tabernacle during the time of the temple. It was also used as a way to anoint and to appoint the kings of Israel. They were also, right, as we know, that Samuel anointed not only King Saul, but also King David. The next part is the ketoret, the incense. The incense had 11 different ingredients, and all these ingredients put together fragrance, which was the very first and last offering that was offered on the golden altar every single day in the tabernacle, and then eventually in the temple. This is the incense. Next, God designates Betzalel to be the chief architect and builder for the tabernacle. We have our very own over here. Wave your hand. Talking to you, Yehuda. God himself told Moses that you will not be the one to draw out the plans and to build the tabernacle. Rather, you will command Bezalel, who was a total of 13 years old at this point, to do so. God imbued him with a tremendous amount of wisdom and comprehension and understanding that he was the chosen one through divine inspiration to be the individual to put together the tabernacle. Then God makes a very interesting warning, and this is what we're going to pay attention to. You'll find it on your papers as source number 1. It's in Exodus chapter 31, verse 13. There are more papers if anyone came late and needs some more. Okay. God warns the Jewish people to make sure to observe the Sabbath. Now, this is not the first time God warns the Jewish people to observe the Sabbath. We know that it is one of the 10 Commandments. Does anyone know what number of the 10 Commandments it is? Anyone? We got to get this right.
6.
Very good. Number 4. Right, Ron, you knew that. Yes. Yeah. The 4th commandment was, or is, observing the Sabbath. What need does the Torah have to do to remind us, make sure to observe the Sabbath right now, at the culmination of the orders to build the tabernacle? And that is precisely the answer. The Talmud, Rashi also tells us that the Jewish people were so excited, so enthusiastic with their new project that they had. You know what their project was? The building of the tabernacle, which, by the way, was a way that they could atone and they could fix up the big mistake that they did with the sin of the golden calf. And this was what God was telling them. You're so excited and enthusiastic to build this tabernacle. However, do so for 6 days. On the 7th day, do not. You shall rest. The construction of the tabernacle, as important, as lofty, as holy as it is, shall take a break in its construction on Shabbat. And this is why it is juxtaposed over here. We also learn that all of the 39 types of ways, melachot, creations, work that was used to construct the tabernacle are the sources of I would say, categories for each and every one of the things which we do not do on the Sabbath. That's for another class to go through all 39 of those. It's a very interesting one. However, let's look at this week what it says in the book, in the Chumash. Again, source 1. Ve'ata tedaber el bnei Yisrael. God says, speak to the Jewish people. Ach et shabbatotai tishmoru. Says, only keep my Sabbaths, meaning, be sure to keep the Sabbath. Ki oti beni uvenechem. It is a sign between me and you, God says. Ledorotechem, for generations, ladat ki ani Hashem mekadishchem, so that you know that I, the Lord, make you holy. So we learn from this verse that when we observe the Sabbath, when we keep the Sabbath, as we're going to soon see some very interesting specifications, we are making ourselves receptacles for holiness and blessing by God Almighty, as he writes in this week's Torah portion. The Zera Shimshon asks 4 very interesting questions. I think 1 or 2 of them we might have thought of, but 2, I don't know how many of us would have ever caught on to this. Look how beautiful. If we take this verse and we look at the 9th word. The 9th word is the word shabbatotai, which means Shabbat. But shabbatotai is a plural way to say Shabbats. In Hebrew, you could say Shabbatot. Shabbatotai are my Sabbaths with an S. So the Zera Shimshon wants to know, why is the word Sabbath being written in plural in this verse? It should say Ach et Shabbat tishmoru. Why does it say shabbatotai in a plural manner? That's question number 1. Question number 2, why is the word ach? Ach meaning but or only. Is that the only commandment that we have to fulfill as Jews? Only the Sabbath? No. Okay. 2 other very interesting questions. Look at source number 2. This is an excerpt from the first of our 10 commandments. And the 4th commandment is Zachor et Yom HaShabbat lekadesho. Translated is, remember the Sabbath day to sanctify it. That is the fourth commandment. Skip down to number 3 set of tablets. It doesn't say Zachor, remember the Sabbath day. It says Shamor et Yom HaShabbat lekadesho. Keep the Sabbath day and sanctify it. So the Zera Shimshon is all of our question. Why change from remember to keep or to guard? Why Zachor is changed to Shamor? Good, simple question. That question we all had. This question we may not have. If we look at source 4 is a follow-up on the fourth commandment in the first set of tablets. It gives a reason why we need to keep the Sabbath. And this is something many of us don't always think of. In our Torah, there are some commandments or some restrictions which make sense to us, and there are some that don't. And guess what? We got to do them all. However, the ones that make sense to us, we have an obligation to learn about it, to connect to it, to see the wisdom, the beauty, the infinite intelligence of the Almighty through the reasoning, through the understanding. Like it's obvious, each and every one of us understands it's very important to say the truth and not take don't take something that's not yours, and to never raise a hand against someone else unless it's self-defense. All these things make sense. These are all laws in our Torah. There are also laws in observance which have reason to them. So the reason why we keep Sabbath, as it says it in the first tablets, is, look at source 4, Ki sheshet yamim asa Adonai et hashamayim ve'et haaretz, et hayam ve'et kol asher bam. It took God 6 days to make the heaven, the earth, the sea, and all that is in them. Vayanach bayom hashavi, and then God rested on the 7th day from creation. Al ken berach Hashem et yom hashabbat bekadesheo, and therefore God blessed the 7th day for us to sanctify it. So very simple answer. This is the answer I probably would have had most of you give if someone comes and asks you, why do you keep the Sabbath? Why don't you go to work on Saturday? Why don't you do all the things you normally do during the week on Saturday? Answer is, God created the world in 6 days. We stopped from creation on the 7th day, just as God stopped creation on the 7th day. We are emulating the Almighty as He told us to. Very good. All good until we look at the reason the Torah gives us on the second tablets for the keeping of Shabbat. Look at the following. Source 5. This is in Deuteronomy chapter 5, verse 15. It says, this is right after the fact that the Torah says, Shamor Yom HaShabbat. It says, V'zacharta ki eved ha'ita be'eretz Mitzrayim. You shall remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt. Vayotziacha Hashem Elokecha misham biyad chazaka ubizra netuya. And God took you out of there, took you out of Egypt with a strong, mighty, stretched out arm. And therefore, tzivecha Hashem Elokecha lasot et Yom HaShabbat. Because of that, God told you to observe the Sabbath. We got a major problem over here, ladies and gentlemen. According to the first tablets, God tells you keep Sabbath because He Himself rested on the 7th day from creation. Okay? But on the second tablets, it says, no, you know why you keep Sabbath? Because God took you out of Egypt. You were a slave in Egypt and He took you out. That's a very big question. This is a question that's normally not spoken about. The Zera Shimshon addresses it head on, and he's going to give us a tremendous answer, beautifully tied into the concept of the sin of the golden calf. Look how beautiful. He says as follows. There is the Talmud in Masechet Eruvin that tells us that at the moment that the Jews accepted the Torah, the evil inclination was completely separated from them. It had no more power over them. By their commitment of saying, Na'aseh v'nishma, we will do and then we'll understand. We will do, and then you'll tell us exactly how to do it. We are just committing 100% to God. The evil inclination completely had no power on the Jewish people, the Talmud says. Furthermore, no other nation was able to ever dominate the Jewish nation, because it was so obvious that God was going to be there for the Jewish people 100% as they committed to Him. It was a dual relationship. It was It was a two-way street. It was us to God. Oh, very good. God now 100% committed. No domination of another nation onto the Jewish people. This is proven by something King David, I forgot to add this to the source sheet. However, I'll tell it to you. King David in Psalms, Tehillim, chapter 82, verse 6 says, Ve'ani amarti Elohim atem. He is referring to when God spoke to the Jewish people, and this was when the Jews came to accept the Torah. God refers to Bnei Israel as Elohim. What does that word mean? That means a God. Were the Jewish people now a God themselves? No. Elohim is also a word which is used for angels. And King David is telling us, just as the Talmud is telling us, that when the Jews were elevated to a state of no longer being bound by the evil inclination, they were now elevated to a state of an angel. I'll just give you, difference between human beings and angels for dummies 101, right, is the following. Angels are not bound by evil inclination. They're not influenced by the evil inclination at all. If they have two things in front of them, right, something kosher, something not kosher, something to not steal or something to steal, they always make the right decision. Why? They don't have that little voice inside of them pushing or tempting them to give into their passion or their desire. There's no such thing as free will or choice by an angel. Why? Because they're lacking that aspect of the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination. Human beings, I don't need to tell you, we each have that voice in our mind. For some of us, God forbid, it's towards addictions and holding back from that. For others, it's using our mouth properly. For others, it's eating kosher. For each and every person, it's something very special and specific, and that's why we're here. We are here to combat our evil inclination, to overcome it, and to receive reward for it. Angels don't receive reward when they do the right thing, because it's not a choice for them. As human beings, we do get merit and reward for making the right decisions. And therefore, the Jewish people were now elevated to a state of being angels. V'atem, how do we say? V'ani amarti Elokim atem. God says you are angels now by accepting the tablets, by accepting the Torah. And therefore, they were never going to die as well, the Talmud says. Because who administers death? Of course it's God, but He uses a special messenger. The messenger is, as we know, the angel of death. An angel of death cannot have power on another angel. As Jews, we were given the status of angels when we accepted the Torah. So Jews were going to no more die, no more have an issue with evil inclination, no issue of other nations dominating over us, all because we accepted the Torah. But everything was unfortunately reversed, because just less than 40 days later, they sinned with the golden calf. And what that did was they reinvited death, reinvited evil inclination, reinvited domination and oppression of other nations onto our nation by showing this act of the opposite of commitment, by showing this act of treason against God. And it reversed everything back. The Zera Shimshon now uses this as a beautiful explanation to first answer his third question of why is there a change from the first tablets to the second tablets, the first one saying, Zachor, you shall remember the Sabbath, and the second one says, Shamor, you should keep, you should guard the Sabbath. Is there a difference between remembering and guarding? Yes, there is. Remembering is, as the Zera Shimshon explains, an active commandment, a positive commandment to remember and to observe the Sabbath. How so? It's by eating well, drinking well, sleeping well, learning Torah, spending time with your family. These are all active, positive commandments. That's what the aspect of Zachor, remember the Sabbath, is. And the Zera Shimshon explains that Bnei Israel, when they accepted those first tablets, were at the status of angels. They were at the status of, they did not even need to work all 6 days of the week. Rather, they were supposed to be like angels that don't work the 6 days, and they rest like God from their non-work as human beings on the 7th day. There were going to be a difference between the 6th and the 7th, but drastically different than the way we have it today. And therefore, you know what their reason was why to keep Sabbath? As angels, only because God created for 6 days and then rested on the 7th. He was fully only creating those 6 days, rested on the 7th, so too you will create in your spiritual ways all 6 days, and the 7th you shall rest by God. Back then, before the sin of the golden calf, that was the one and only reason why God commanded the Jewish people to remember, and that would be observing, to remember the Sabbath. However, when they sinned with the golden calf, what that did was they now were lowered from a level of angels back to human beings with temptation, with this struggle against the evil inclination. At that point, they went back to having to work all 6 days of the week. They went back to having to struggle to try to beat the evil inclination. Therefore, Shamor et Yom HaShabbat, guard the Sabbath, was written on the second tablets in order that all the negative commandments, all of the restrictions that apply to the Sabbath will now be observed. And that's why it is Shamor et Yom HaShabbat. You shall guard the Sabbath. And that's why today we are left with both of these. We're left with the original reason of remembering the Sabbath because God rested after 6 days of creation. We need to do the same. But we also need to be careful not to commit any of the melachot, of the prohibited actions on Sabbath. That is only because of the sin of the golden calf. So that answers the second two questions of why the change of name, or the word, rather, from remember to observe, and the change of reason. Because the Jewish people, we have to remember, were completely different before and after the golden calf. Just as humanity was completely changed and different before and after Adam and Eve ate from the tree of knowledge. That much of a difference as before and after, meaning before the evil inclination was separate from Adam and Eve. After they ate from the tree of knowledge, it was part and parcel with Adam and Eve. So too, before the golden calf, after the Jews accepted the Torah, they were completely separated from the evil inclination. After they sinned with the golden calf, they worshipped the golden calf, they now became, again, different and now stuck with the evil inclination. To answer his other question, let's see where I'm up to. Okay, now, if the Jewish people would have endured the entire 430 years that they were promised to be exiled in Egypt, as was promised to Abraham at the covenant of the halves, or covenant of the loaves, Brit ben Abitarim, then they would have never had to endure exile ever again. However, the Jews were taken out after 210 years of being in Egypt. The reason for this was because God understood, He saw that they were already stooping down to the 50th level of impurity, and if they would get into that level of impurity, they would be stuck eternally there. For that reason, He quickly pulled them out before it was too late. That's why the Jewish people were rushed to leave Egypt. This is coming up for Passover. Many Sephardics have a tradition to take the Seder plate and to go around the table over each person singing Bibhilu Yatzanu Mimitzrayim, and everyone has a different tune. Bibhilu. There's different, I guess. That's what it means. So Bibhilu is the Aramaic. It's an Aramaic word. And the meaning of that word is in a hurry. Because in a hurry, we left Egypt. In a hurry? We were there for 210 years. What's the hurry? God was quickly forcing the Jewish people out of Egypt because it was time. The time has come. If they didn't leave at that moment, then unfortunately they could have got stuck in that depth of impurity and never shaken it off. What we learn from here, the Zera Shimshon says, is that when they accepted the first command tablets, they were now at a level of they would never have to go back into exile. When they sinned with the golden calf, they now had to go right back into exile. When they accepted Naaseh v'Nishma, when they accepted the Torah full-heartedly, even though they owed time for the complete 430 years in exile, however, when they said, no, God, we're 100% with you, God wiped that off. He said, I'll take that off the credit. We're not going to have to owe you any exile. But when they sinned with the golden calf, unfortunately, they now got back to regular law. You have to pay back for the time that you were taken out early. That means that the reason why we keep Shabbat after the sin of the golden calf is to remind us where God took us from. To remind us that when He took us out of Egypt, He did so on condition to keep the Sabbath. Now the Zera Shimshon explains, the Torah is teaching us that God is telling us how to stay safe in exile. Something that will protect the Jewish people as a complete nation in exile is through keeping Sabbath. And he proves it from the verse. The verse is that last verse. It's on page 5. It's on source 5, the bottom of the first page. It says, you will remember that you were a slave and God took you out of Egypt. How? Biyad chazaka u'bizra netuyah, with great strength and a stretched out arm. Because God took you out early, al ken, therefore, tzivecha, He commanded you to keep the Sabbath. We see, the Zera Shimshon says, that since God took us out early, that's why He gave us Sabbath. When God took us out early, He was taking us early, but compromising, will we need exile or not? After we sinned at the golden calf, we will need exile. You know what will protect us? Keeping Sabbath, the Zera Shimshon says. This is what the Torah tells us. He's not making this up. He's saying this is based on the verse. When you read the verse, this is the only way to understand it. He says that the reason, exactly, al-ken, the reason for is because He took us out in a hurry. And therefore, we're now able to answer our first two questions. The first question was, why is Shabbat in plural? And the second is, why is the word ach only? Because the Zera Shimshon explains that the only way to be spared during exile and to hopefully get out of exile is by observing the Sabbath. Why in plural? Because the Talmud tells us that if the Jewish people were to completely observe as a nation 2 whole Sabbaths, the Mashiach would come. So therefore, when it says, Ach et Shabbatotai, only, you know the only way to get out of exile? Shabbatotai, keep 2 Sabbaths. Those 2 Sabbaths will guarantee the Jewish people to come out of their exile and have their final redemption, have the Mashiach. What we learn from here is a tremendous power, I will say a lesson to survival for the Jewish people. Now, to many of us, it's maybe not so comprehensible. Rabbi, how different is it if I turn on the light, I don't turn on the light? If I walk up the stairs or if I take the elevator? If I watch TV or I don't watch TV? If I use the phone, if I use the car or not? Rabbi, at the end of the day, I'm still resting. How does that make a difference? We have to recognize, we have to understand that when God is telling us that this is the key to our survival in exile and the hopes of getting out of it, there's a reason for it. I broke it down to 4 main categories. This is my opinion, and you welcome to add on or to subtract. This is what I truly feel is the most beneficial from our Sabbath, from our Shabbat. The first is that it maintains family unity. The fact that we're able to come around the table with our children and our grandchildren and recite the Kiddush and to break bread and to have a meal all together and to speak of our week and to reconnect, that is something that, as a family unit, if we do not do, we will just keep on growing apart. Naturally, every child, every family member is interested in something else. Some are going off to be doctors, some to be lawyers, some in business, someone would like to be a chef, some are still in school. Each and every family member is kind of going in their own direction, which is fine, which is encouraged. That's okay. But the Sabbath reunites everybody, puts everyone back on the same page, puts everyone back on track and in touch with each and every one of their family members, which is an absolute need and importance. That is the first main benefit of the Sabbath. The second is communal engagement. The fact that as Jews we're able to congregate in a synagogue, in a house of worship, is so important. It's important on many levels. It's important on social levels. It's important to enhance our prayer as the masses, to see friends, to see family, to come together. There's no greater feeling than coming together in camaraderie in order to observe the Sabbath. That's the second. The third is prayer. Sabbath, on Shabbat, we understand we have a longer prayer, we have beautiful melodies, we're able to hear the weekly Torah portion. This is something that we don't have the time for, or the allowance during the rest of the week to have. It is a beautiful time to recite extra Tehillim and other prayers. It is a very special time designated for prayer. And the fourth is, it is an extra time to spend learning Torah. During the week, people have work, from morning till evening, and then family duties, traveling duties. On Sabbath, we stop. We stop from all that and we have extra time. We have extra time to sleep, to eat well, to drink well, spend time with family, introspect, pray, and also learn Torah. These are the ingredients that make the Shabbat so special that it is the key to our survival, the Zera Shimshon says. God implanted it. Only for the second tablets, only after the sin of the golden calf. Because before that, we were like angels. It was obvious we'd only do that. However, when the Yetzer Hara, when the evil inclination joined us again through the sin of the golden calf, we needed Sabbath for another reason. Not only the reason of God created the world in 6 days and rested, we create all 6 days and we need to rest. That's one reason. We have another reason, that God took us out of Egypt. He took us out of slavery and bondage. He gave us the Torah, the greatest gift ever. And because of that, He told us, He took us out quickly, but He gave us something. He traded it off with the gift of Shabbat, the gift of the key to our survival. And this is one thing, before we move on to the second part of this evening's class, this is one thing that we need to take advantage of. As Jews, we need to take advantage of our Shabbat. Maybe before I move on to the next part, I want to explain a major misconception, and that is based on a story of an individual who was visiting China, ironically, okay, don't go nowadays, and he was staying at a hotel, and there was no Sabbath elevator. So, what does an observant Jew do when there's no Sabbath elevator? You go and you find the closest staircase. To his great dismay, he was staying on the 40th flight. Okay? So, he's approaching the elevator, or the reception area, and he asks the fellow, where is the staircase? So he says, what do you need a staircase for? You're staying on the 40th floor, Mr. So-and-so. Just take the elevator. No. it's my Sabbath. I need to take the staircase. Okay, shows him the staircase. Goes to the staircase. He's walking, and when he gets to floor 20, he's already huffing and puffing. And there's another worker that finds him in the staircase, and he looks at him and he says, "Sir, are you okay? You look like you're going to have a conniption. You're going to just pass out. What's going on?" He looks at him and he says, "Today's my Sabbath. I can't take the elevator." So the man looks at him and he says, "Sorry, here in China, we don't know from Sabbath. What does that mean in English or in Chinese?" Okay? So he tells him, "Well, it's my day of rest." And the man is dripping in sweat from head to toe. He's huffing and puffing, and he's thinking to himself, day of rest. Doesn't look like I'm resting so well. What am I doing? In good faith, he went up the next 20 flights. He made it, and he was good. But that's a real question we would ask ourselves. What is the qualifications of a day of rest? Does it mean hiking up 40 flights or pressing that good-for-nothing button that's going to get me up in 2 seconds? So if you translate rest as work, well, then we need to define what is considered work and what is the definition of rest. See, to many, rest on Sabbath could be lying down on the couch, turning on the TV, and I am resting, and this is my Sabbath. This is my Shabbos. Is that what God's intention was when He told us to rest on Shabbat? We have it in this week's Torah portion. It's something we need to know. It's coming up in a couple days, and guess what? It's coming up 7 days later. And wait, 7 days after that, and 7 days after that. It's every week we have Shabbat. We better understand what we're resting from. So, in order to understand what we're resting from, we have to remember why we're resting. And that is based on the first and primary reason why we keep Sabbath. We read, because God created the world in 6 days and then rested on the seventh. Now let's pause for a moment. Do we ever imagine that God worked hard to create the world? That He strained Himself in creating the world? Absolutely not. There is no might and no power which is too great for the Almighty, because He's above all that. So when He created the world, He wasn't creating out of hard work and then resting from working hard. On the contrary, He rested on the seventh day from that which He did during the sixth. What was He doing the whole first sixth? He was creating. And therefore, we have to cease and rest from creating on Shabbat. When you take that definition of rest, of the opposite of creation, meaning resting from creating, that now redefines your day of Sabbath completely. Because when you create fire, or when you create electromagnetic waves, or electricity, what you're doing is something that's not strenuous at all. It's the press of a button. However, it is creating, and it's creating that God wants us to rest from on Sabbath. With that in mind, it answers that hilarious story of the individual in China that was climbing up to his hotel room. And that is something we need to remind ourselves. Sometimes invited very, very far for a meal, and it could be a 45-minute walk. And just jumping in the car for a quick 5 or 10-minute ride seems like real resting. And God would want me to rest and be recuperated and healthy and happy and calm and not sweaty on the Sabbath. That's not what God's intention of rest was. God's intention of rest is resting from creating. And now, it's obviously not within the scope of this class, but how do we define what's creating and not is a whole other learning of what the 39 melachot, deeds of creation, are actually. So that's just to put things into perspective of the day of rest. Now, the Zera Shimshon continues and quotes the Talmud and says, anybody who enjoys Shabbat, I want to read you the Hebrew word, kol ha'me'aneg et ha'shabbat, anyone who enjoys the Sabbath will be given reward that is boundless, has absolutely no boundaries. The Talmud learns it from somewhere very specific. It says, we learn it from our patriarch Jacob. As the verse says, you have it in source number 7. Source number 7 says, Az tit'anag al Hashem. This, by the way, this verse we have, according to the Sephardic Kiddush, we say it before V'shamiru, which is in this week's Torah portion. That's quoted in number 6 in your handouts. But we say, Az tit'anag al Hashem, v'irkavticha al bamot ha'aretz. Then you shall delight with the Lord, and I will cause you to ride on high places of the land, and I will give you to eat the heritage of Jacob your father. The verse says in Yeshayahu, for the mouth of the Lord has spoken. And the Talmud asks, why is the gift a boundless gift compared to Jacob's gift? The Zera Shimshon explains, before the Talmud gives the answer, that Jacob was, by the way, the only one of our 3 patriarchs who observed the Sabbath. Not Abraham and not Isaac. In another class that we gave last year, that hopefully I could find the recording for you, we did explain in great depth how and why Jacob was the only one of our patriarchs who kept Sabbath. But it was he, on his way escaping from Lavan, on his way back to the land of Israel, is when he started keeping the Sabbath. And the blessing is given, like Jacob had, a boundless blessing, as the next verse says, V'haya zaracha ka'afar ha'aretz. And your seed shall be as the dust of the earth, so numerous. Ufaratzta. And you shall gain strength. Yama v'kedma tzafona v'negba. North, south, east, west, all over. Boundless. So the Zera Shimshon has a very fair question. He says, what does it mean that there is a boundless blessing in this world? I mean, even the world has boundaries. You go too far, you're out of space. So what does it mean that anyone who keeps the Sabbath, anyone who enjoys the Sabbath, will have merit and reward without boundaries? Furthermore, if more than one person keeps Sabbath, as we know there are, we know some of those type of people, okay? How is it possible that 2 people or multiple people can observe the Sabbath and their blessing, their heritage, their reward sees no limits? At a certain point, one person who observes the Sabbath, another person who observes the Sabbath, their boundaries will meet and then it will be limited. And you can't say the Zera Shimshon says that we're talking about merit in the world to come, because every good deed has merit in the world to come. And that removes the uniqueness of this beautiful blessing and merit of keeping Sabbath. So how could it make any sense that the keeping of the Sabbath guarantees boundless blessings, asks the Zera Shimshon? He says as follows. He says, God, all he really, really wants is to bestow blessing and good onto each and every one of his creations. Ideally, that's all he really wants. However, there is a combating force, and that is the midat hadin. Meaning the first part is midat harachamim, the side of loving compassion that God has, but there's also judgment. And this judgment is brought about by a person's shortcomings and misdeeds. So there's this constant battle between loving kindness and judgment. And the Zera Shimshon explains that only through this judgment that we unfortunately bring upon ourselves, it's self-inflicted based on our shortcomings, are we ever harmed, unfortunately. Harmed even that our blessings are not completely delivered to us. They're bounded in a certain way, the Zera Shimshon explains. He says when one does something good, they should receive this amount of reward, for argument's sake. But the delivery, we only receive less than that. And that's because the unfortunate misdeeds and shortcomings that we do quantify and shrink the blessing that God really needs to, so to say, give to us. He says the Sabbath is different. on Shabbat, we are also supposed to enjoy from what we do on Shabbat. The best food, the best drinking, the best rest, the best family time is all supposed to be on Shabbat. One may think, oh, maybe we're not going to receive our full reward, our full merit for it, because we're enjoying this from the Sabbath, and that could be maybe even giving in to our evil inclination. The Zera Shimshon says, no, Sabbath is different. As long as you have the right intention to do the will of God on Shabbat, then even if you are enjoying and there is physical pleasure, then you still get full reward for keeping the Shabbat. That means when a person does something and they're giving into their passion, they're giving into their desire, although it's kosher food, although it's something you're allowed to do, but if you're giving into your passion, your desire, you're still feeding your evil inclination. And that's what holds back from the full merit. On Shabbat, there is no such rule. Why? Because the Zohar tells us that on Shabbat, even the evil prosecuting angels all take a rest. The fires of Gehinnom, the fires of hell, are shut off on Shabbat. Shabbat, everything, all of the creation takes a rest. And therefore, even if a person is also enjoying and giving into their desire and their passion on the Shabbat, all of that is 100% merit and good. And that's how the Zera Shimshon answers the Talmud. The Talmud says, anyone who enjoys, not anyone who observes, if you enjoy the Sabbath, God will give you a full blessing, a blessing that has no boundaries, meaning the entire merit that is due to you, that is owed to you, will come to you for observing the Sabbath out of tremendous enjoyment. So I would like to end off with that nowadays, the Sabbath is a very easy sale. To keep Shabbat is nothing too hard. There's a couple of reasons for that. The main reason is because all week long, most of us are in the rat race. We're chasing this, we're chasing that. We have to run to this and run to that. If it's not sports, it's meeting people, it's work, it's going to the bank, it's buying, it's selling, it's non-stop. On Shabbat, we are told to recharge ourselves, to clear our mind. Maybe back in the day, it was the difference of plowing and pruning and selling fruits and vegetables to just relaxing. But today life has become so complicated, so intricate, so many different details and facets that our minds are always preoccupied with. Shabbat is able to spare us from forgetting what our mission, what our great target is. I think the tagline has already gone around, unplug to recharge. Although that sounds counterintuitive, when your phone is low on battery, what do you do to it? You plug it to charge it. No, what we need to do on Shabbat is separate ourselves from our devices, from our vehicles, from all of our distractions, which, by the way, help us tremendously. Can you imagine if we did not have the mode of transportation the way we have nowadays? We would not be able to travel, to visit people, to meet people, to do new things, to conduct business the way we do. It's super important. But there's one day a week where we need to put it on halt and relax from it. If a person doesn't learn the idea of self-control when it comes to technology, it's very, very hard. But at least if 25 hours a week, you're completely out of touch with the news, which will make you meshugane, it will make you go crazy. And with the stock market, which can also make you go crazy. And with business. And with things to do with school, things to do with work, things to do with so many different items in our life that we may just lose focus. There are many non-Jews who have taken upon themselves to take a day or half a day a week to completely unplug themselves from their electronics because they see that the Jews are doing it. And there's a tremendous advantage to it. If we don't unplug from all the electronics and technology that we have, it's so hard to enjoy the Shabbat. Enjoying Shabbat means grounding yourself, getting back down to earth, getting back to appreciating real food and fast food, and family time and not FaceTime, and speaking to a human being, hearing their original voice opposed from an echo through a device. It's bringing back that human touch that as human beings we are so degenerating from, that we need the Shabbat more than ever. If there's one thing you can teach your children and teach your grandchildren, is the importance of observing this gift. This is the gift God gave us to preserve us in the exile. This is the gift that God gave us to remain sane. If we don't unplug from our weak work, it's so hard for us to continue being that great parent you want to be, that great spouse you want to be, that great Jew you want to be. It all has to do with Shabbat. Don't take Shabbat lightly, and look forward to Shabbat. Enjoy the Shabbat, because the blessing that God sends to those who enjoy the Shabbat sees no boundaries. Thank you, everyone, for that. Is baby Yusuf?
The guy that wanted the 40th floor did not get